All right, so the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about was I'm showing you how I can change this cut plane, right? And it has an effect with this generic model because it's not going to do it with all. So when I change this down to 1'6", you see it actually represents this cut right across here. If I was to take this out of shaded view and look through it, it doesn't actually end up showing you that line below. So it's not really doing a live cut, but it does do some of the cutting. Now, one of the frustrations that it took me a long time to learn, I'm going to change this cut plane back up to here around 4'4", which you should see I'm cutting right about in this region. So I'm seeing those two steps. Well, what happens is when you change the category of this from a generic model to almost any other type of model, which typically we would be either doing a mechanical equipment or a specialty equipment, by simply now loading that into the project, you're going to see at this time, it no longer has that heavy line around where the cut was, but more importantly, the cut plane no longer works. So if I set my cut plane down here to 1 foot, I should just be looking at this little piece. But you're going to see that no matter where you put your cut plane, it doesn't affect that. It only affects it in a generic model. Okay. And ironically, somewhere around 2020, 2019, they started adding a couple new categories. And one of the categories that they added was a structural connection. And you'll see right here that this says enable cutting in views. So when you change it to a structural connection and load it into the project, you'll see that it does allow it to just cut where it's hitting. All right. However, in that family category and parameters, if we took the enable cutting in views off and loaded it into the project, you'll see now it works like the rest of the families. Now, my frustration is they should have put this enabled cutting in views in all of the old families, but they did not. And I don't think there's any other ones. You'll see when I pick on window, it doesn't say enable cutting in views. And I've gone through here, and the only one that I found was that structural connection, which was added at a very, like I said, that was added sometime around 2019. But it's an important concept that you have to understand with a family. If you make a really funky shape, a big piece of equipment, and you say, well, why doesn't all that stuff show? Just to give you a feel, if I went to this thing and I said, oh, you know what? This thing's got a roof on it. Like that. And you said, oh, well, this roof's way up here and it's supported by by columns and whatnot. What's going to happen is when that guy goes into your project, this big box is going to hide everything that's below it. And there's no real way to see those objects. Now, you can then do things like turn that visibility of that object off in plan, load it into the project, and then you could see things below there. But this is a real challenging problem that your brain has to overcome, which is the generic model is a little different than all the other families because it's the only family other than the structural connection, which ironically, you would like to think that a generic model would be able to turn that off to say, no, don't cut it in views, but it doesn't. So the generic has to be cut in views. All the rest of the models are not cut in views, except for the structural connection, which they actually give you the choice. Do you want it to be cut by the cut plane or not? So it's a little bit of an advanced task, but it's sort of important because what I had asked Eric to do, Eric was going to go out and see if he couldn't find some people to give us quotations of how much it would cost to build certain families. And I think we want to basically build 4 families as a homework assignment. One of them being a hot water skid, and then the other one that I talked about was being a shipping container. I believe the others that I asked Eric to do one was a pipe fitting and one was a duct accessory, something to that extent. So that's something you could get a jump start on. Oh, Eric's sharing a little bit of his screen. Let's see what he's looking at. Oh, your hot water skids. So you can see real quick, looking at those, it could seem like you could spend a day, you could spend a week. I'll be honest with you, I could see some people spending a month to build that hot water skid. Now, unfortunately, the average century project is not going to allow you to have that kind of time. But at the same token, everyone's going to be asking you to actually do that build. Okay, because if you have a hot water skid, you're going to want to show that in your project. And like you had mentioned, Ginger, you can find manufacturers who will provide them. That's what I want you to do, is try to get one from a manufacturer, get a couple from a manufacturer so that we can look at them, because 99 times out of 100, what you're getting from the manufacturer will absolutely mess up your project, because they're looking at the project. All they see is a hot water skid. You've got to see 39 different pieces of equipment and 22 different kinds of air handlers and all the rest of the stuff. Okay. So the problem is, when it comes from a vendor, it usually has too much detail for a project, if that makes any sense. And when you go to one of those websites, like we were sort of looking for, what you're going to find then is that hot water skid is going to be too generic. It's going to be too typical for it's going to be for all kinds of projects, and it's not going to be specific to your project, so that you can make sure, do I have access? Do I have enough room in that room to put that hot water skid? So
that makes sense.
That makes sense?
Yes.
So we need to get you drawing some kind of. Did you ever come to an idea of what kind of house, hospital, building? What did you want to try to draw for your project?
I don't know. I was drawing the house I grew up in.
Yeah, do you have anything done on it?
Yeah.
Show me what you got.
You gotta give me a second to open it. I'm slow today.
That's not a problem.
Oh. It's not.
So generally, you just let me know when you got it open. Share your screen once you do. But I'm just going to go ahead and talk while you're doing that.
Okay.
So generally, what a good practice is when you come into that project, you're going to have these 4 elevation markers if you've used a standard architectural template. The best idea is for you to try to build that building inside those 4. All right. And often when I'm working on a job, if that building is bigger, let's say something like this, what I would typically do is I would do a loop around those elevations. Now, there are people that say it would be better to center the building first between all of those and then move them out. Okay. And part of the reason is because of how the elevations are actually set up. But the idea is to get your start of your house, you're going to want a floor plan and then the ability to go to the elevations to look at those elevations. Okay.
Okay.
See, so then I can maybe go down to this. Now, obviously, these elevations don't really make much sense because all they are is four walls. But as soon as number one, let's see, as soon as I start putting some doors and windows in them, then they begin to make a little more sense. Remembering that one way to put a window in is to put the window, select the kind of size from the window that you have, might be to go to load a family. And when you go to load the family, you should go to an imperial library like this. If you don't have this, that means you loaded your software a little bit weird and you don't have the libraries, but there should be one called Windows. And then you might be able to put in a triple vertical or whatever type of window that you're putting in. Now, you'll notice that as I'm putting these windows in, I actually put several windows in that didn't show up. That was because I played with this cut plane and made it really low. Typically, a cut plane is going to be at either 3'6" or 4'6". And you'll see that when I turned that on, those windows were actually there. And then if you're going to try to adjust them in elevation, you could adjust them in elevation by simply moving them, picking them, and saying, nope, it's 2 foot off the floor and it's 18 feet away from this window. That's using the temporary dimensions that we've learned about. See, so this one here, if these two were really sort of centered, you can't do it. You can't do the equal sign unless you actually put a dimension in. If I put a dimension and I said from here to here to here, now you'll find that if I hit equal, it would center that window. Okay. Ginger, you find your house? Not yet.
Yes.
You share. You know how to share the screen? It's under present. There you go. Oh, good. And are those room tags or are those actual pieces of text?
Room tags, I think. Oh.
Pick on one of them. Pick on one of them. It should show you the room behind it. Pick on it. Yep, it's a room tag. And you can see, you see the red line going around? That's showing you where that room is. Now, typically, in that kind of project, that bedroom, that closet is included into the bedroom. So if you pick that wall that's dividing the bedroom from that closet, can you do that?
This one?
Yeah, that one would work. Over on the side, there's a checkbox that's in blue that says room bounding, right? And it has a check mark in it.
Mm-hmm.
If you take that check mark out, What'll happen is now that bedroom, if you picked on the word bedroom, you would see the red box is going to include the closet. See how it included that closet?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the neat things that you can do once you start setting up a room, now granted, you don't typically do it for a house, but maybe you were going to do a presentation drawing so that you could put this in a magazine to show how you laid out your house. A real easy way to give this thing a lot of color is to go to the click once in white space. All right, over on in the properties, there's a thing that says color scheme and it says the word none. Yep. And if you click on the word none, all right, a window popped up somewhere, and what you're going to do is say, "Give me a color scheme by name." We can't see that window because of how you shared your screen. So if you can just if you just click on, do you see one color by name or color by scheme? Forget what it says.
Schema one.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at mine. Color scheme, you pick that. So what it says at the top is categories. Change that from category spaces to category rooms.
Okay.
And then click on the one that says name. And then say okay. And you should get a colored floor plan. And give it a second, and there's your colored floor plan. And see, the nice reason of doing that colored floor plan, can you see the little closets that have not been included? They're white. So you're not counting that square footage.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And what I would want you to do is to progress this a little bit further. I'd like to see you put in room tags or dimensions, window tags, door tags, and then we're going to try to write a door schedule and a window schedule for it. Okay?
Okay.
So you can attempt to do that. Try to tag the windows, try to make a door schedule, try to make a window schedule. I understand that your expertise is not architecture and you're not really driving to get into architecture, but it's a good idea for you to at least understand how those schedules work, because mechanical and plumbing, the schedules are even more hairy, and it's better to sort of start with training wheels, so to speak.
Yeah.
Why don't you see if you can do that? Put some dimensions on this thing, try to tie it down so that we can try to make some drawings that would at least pass as a set of architectural drawings, if that makes sense.
Yes.
The nice thing is then you could take a job doing BIM for an architect if you really had to, or maybe design your sister's next house.
Yeah.
Eric, do you have something you want me to show? I don't know how we can communicate. Let's see. Yeah, that's a humdinger. That looks like a bunch of AutoCAD stuff.
If I have to cut out again, I apologize, but I'm just being whatever.
That's fine. That's fine.
So, yeah, this is one I just downloaded from a free site, and it's none of it's pipe or whatever. It's all just revolves and extrusions. So I guess is it that we want it to be flexible, or that we want it to be able to count the fittings and the pipe?
No, it's more that it's going to be the file size and the ability to edit it. That thing would be an absolute nightmare if I asked you to start editing it.
Yeah. Right? It's at 1.7, which
is never going to be allowable. So what happens is if we make these subcomponents for it, we can probably get that file size. It's probably going to be approaching a meg, but it shouldn't quite hit a meg.
Can you put a valve into another family?
Yes.
Okay.
Now you can't put the typical valve in. You have to build these subcomponents. And this is going to be one of our big, who knows, maybe we'll get some requests for this from this video, but that is the typical problem that Autodesk doesn't really tell you how to build that family. I've never seen any real documentation on how you should build that family, but my recommendation is there should be a kit of parts.
Yeah.
You should have a handful of subfamilies
Your
to
strut,
create.
your fittings, your pipes, your valves.
Usually the framing at the bottom of the thing, the skid itself, some of the tanks, definitely some sensors. See that when you zoom into that valve, is it just an individual just structures on that valve?
No, this one's actually a family. Everything else I clicked on has been a revolve or whatever.
Yeah.
Which valve?
Yeah. What about the valve below that? Right there, the bronze one. Yep. See, they did that as a revolve. No.
Yeah, it's a revolve.
Yeah, yeah. They did.
So that's three pieces to make that up.
Right,
No,
and then
4.
there's another 3 pieces right over on the other side too.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. And you probably definitely don't. Well, I don't think you would need the nut like that, but whatever.
Yeah.
So the only thing they really put in as a family was the pressure gauge.
Yeah. Well, you could really tell that best by looking at the families over on the side, and you'll see underneath generic models hit a plus. Yep.
Yeah,
Gauge is the only one they put in. And that's why the hot water skid becomes a very good test of what someone's family creation capabilities are. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And the shipping container one, I've done some really good research from, I cut the end out of my shipping container. And I'll probably just include a couple pictures whenever we go into my build of it. But I can tell you, Ginger and Eric and Misty, I'd like each of you to try to build a family that would be as much like a shipping container as you can devour off the internet.
All right.
All right.
You're just saying the container, no windows at this point.
The container, no windows. I would like the ability. Your container should have the ability to add the windows. You have to come up with a way. How are you going to add those windows?
All right.
Okay. And my thought process is, as these other people want to get some exposure to Revit, we're going to try to build some people. I'd like everyone in the group to be better at building families than most people in the companies are. But at the same token, I think we still need to teach everybody how to make a set of drawings. So, Ginger, my question to you is, do you feel comfortable in trying to take a stab at how to dimension and how to tag and how to do that stuff?
Yeah, I don't have a hard time with the dimensioning. I had it dimensioned. I don't know what I did. I might open the wrong project. I don't know.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And listen, try to make a border. Try to make a full set of drawings so that I can say, yep, as far as I'm concerned, Ginger, you're officially a drawer. You can make a drawing. Okay? That's not what a Revit BIM specialist is. A Revit BIM specialist needs to be able to make a drawing, but we also need to be able to make families, and we need to be able to understand what the flow is of this workflow. And I'll be honest with you, what I saw from Mike today, I feel bad for him because that would be a perfect job for you or any other entry level people at Century that are trying to get up in BIM. Tracing that stuff off would be very, very good exercise for you. But I totally understand where he's coming from. He's probably only got so much of a budget and he's doing the job for Haynes. So Haynes is a little bit picky on who he lets work on the project, if that makes sense.
Ah. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think what we want to do next. So I'm going to give you a little bit more, Ginger. So we want you to do the dimensions, right? Which is just going to be something very similar to this. Generally, I'm going to go to the wall faces. Generally, you want this overall dimension. And then the next dimension you want is the overall of all the inner pieces. And then this one would be to the doors. And the windows. All right. Then the next thing I told you to do was I wanted you to tag the doors and the windows. If we go tag by category, if you've started with the architectural template, you will have door tags and window tags. Okay. Now the trick of them is getting these window tags to work, because I think that window mark is actually the mark. Let's see. It's the 18, which means they're actually making it probably be the type mark, maybe. Yep, the type mark is 18, which is really crazy. So this guy's type mark is 3, as opposed to the door. You'll see it's actually the mark. See the difference? Here's the mark, where the other one is the type mark. And you'll see this one probably doesn't even have a type mark. It does have a type mark. So this is where people, when they're first learning Revit, especially architectural people, get really frustrated because it takes a while for you to understand the difference between a type mark and a mark. And the best way to look at it is every object gets a mark. It's its own individual number, as opposed to every different type of window. So that's this. Every one of these types that's underneath that window gets a type mark. So that you could have 7 of the 8 number 18 windows. But with the doors, you don't ever end up with any duplicate numbers because you want every door to be individual. Now, that doesn't mean that that's how everyone does it. Some people want these door marks to not refer to the mark, but instead refer to the type mark. And that's all going to be related to when you then, the next thing that you're going to end up doing is making a view schedule. You're going to want to do a schedule for both doors. Oh, that's on the other screen. For both doors and for windows. Or yeah, doors and windows was the 2 that I asked you to mark. Okay, then the other schedule that typically is in a set of drawings is going to be the room schedule. Okay. So in those 3 schedules, you should put on a sheet of paper. Another thing you should be putting on a sheet of paper should be these elevations. See that elevation right there? That should end up on a piece of paper. And typically it only is going to have a couple notes on it. It's going to probably say, this thing's got brick on the outside, and it's got aluminum downspouts, and it's got vinyl soffits, and it's got asphalt shingles. And that's typically what an elevation is in a set of architectural prints. Okay. And I want you to try to make the drawing, so then we can try to teach you how to make the drawing better. That makes sense? And like I said, I'm going to take all these walls and I'm going to make them not be unconnected 20 feet, but instead I'm going to connect them to level 2, because that's a more Revit way to build. Because then what happens is when I change level 2, I can make those walls get taller or shorter. And obviously, then the next thing I'd do is attach a roof to it. I would like you to, Ginger, to try to put a little bit of pizzazz on this, on these elevations. So in other words, if your house is in brick, let's make it brick. And then we'll probably find out that wall is drawn backwards. Oop. I hit a space bar and flip it. It was actually showing the brick on the inside of the building. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that your house is brick, but if it's siding, let's get some siding lines on there. Let's try to make your plan, your elevation. You typically should have a reflected ceiling plan where you would do any lighting work and lighting information. You would need a roof plan, a floor plan, reflected ceiling plan, the 4 elevations, and typically what most people would put in a set of drawings would then also be a section. And typically you'd put 2 sections. One, at a minimum, you would put 2 sections in. Okay. And these sections would get a little bit of information and end up being on a drawing. Obviously, without a roof, what happens is when we start cutting the section, then we start to see things like, oh, well, one of the things this thing needs is a floor. So you're going to find that architectural will go into a floor, and I'm going to go with they don't even give you a slab on grade. How funny is that? By simply doing the floor, you'll see that in that section, I now have a floor. And I'd want the footing conditions and whatnot. Now, this is a perfect chance for me to show you that if I go to a fine detail, you see I end up with this concrete pattern. The scale would probably be more like about a 3/4. And you would notice on this one here, this wall, because this guy was very generic, but if I take him to that brick on metal stud, then I see the bricks going to the inside. So I flip it around. I'm starting to get a section that I can draw the footing below. Is this going to be a concrete wall? How's that going to be supported? And then the last thing that you need on this is just like the floor. I went in and I did a roof. I'll do a roof, right? I'll hover over one of these walls and I'll hit tab and it'll select all of them. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to give myself a 1 foot overhang, do my tab, and say finish. And what we would see then, all of a sudden, our sections have a little more detail to them. You can actually see what's going on. And of course, let's try to incorporate a little bit of 3D. capture a 3D shot or two. We didn't cover this before, but one of the things you could do with underneath the 3D is there's this thing called a camera. So if I'm in that floor plan, level 1, and I say, well, what would it look like if I had a camera view? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit the camera where I would actually be standing to take the picture. I'm going to aim it in the direction to take the picture. And voila. Now, what I tell people for this 3D view is I do not recommend stretching this crop boundary out. Okay. Instead, what you want to do is go back to that 3D view while you got that crop boundary selected and back your camera up. You'll notice that instead of me stretching it out, and the reason is because this will distort it. It'll make it like a fisheye lens and make you having some crazy looking thing that's not even parallel anymore. However, I will stretch these down so that now I could stick that on a sheet, maybe with a duplicate of this view right here, so that whoever you're designing the house for can get a view, get a feel, get a little bit of 3D. And don't get me wrong, push this to a limit. You can change this and make this shaded. You can play with the shadows. You can play with the lighting. You can play with whatever you want. But I want you to try to make a set of drawings. So it's probably going to be about 6 to 7 sheets for a house like you were drawing up. Okay? So you still got some homework on that end. The other thing that we all, please, let's try to come back on Thursday with the 5 websites that are families that we can actually find. Hopefully we'll get those other 2 new invitees to attend, and maybe Nate, and hopefully Tyler will be here. But unless someone has a question or you want me to further expound on what I've showed you for getting that house in there and what my expectations are, I think I'm going to cut this one a little bit short because I'm losing my voice a little bit. I spent a lot of time in the field today. So if anyone's got anything, please bring it
I'm
up.
fine with cutting that short. I'm okay with that.
All right. Can you live with that, Ginger?
Yeah.
All right.
Quite informative.
Well, my thinking is if we just knock it down into these little nugget sizes, but remember, it's really about you clicking. So I'm trying to get you to click. You got to click for me, all right?
I know.
Don't worry about how things going in the field. I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream, and we'll say goodnight to each other.